I think you will get to the stage where it's going to be very hard for people to do a lot of normal life unless they can prove their vaccination status.
Yeah.
I think you'll find a situation where countries say to you, you're not coming in here unless we see whether you've either been vaccinated, you've had the disease and have got antibodies, or you've had a recent high-quality test. And so if people have got to understand vaccination is going to be, in the end, your route to liberty.
Welcome to Labour Grassroots. We're talking about whether we should have vaccine certificates. And there was Tony Blair. He sort of introduced the idea in that interview. To start our discussion, I'm really pleased that we've got with us the former Shadow Attorney General, Shami Chakrabarti. How are you doing, Shami?
Sorry, I'm fine, Crispin, thank you. And I had my first vaccination a couple of weeks ago. Nobody held me down, nobody forced me by law, but there's just good science and good policy behind it. I had it thanks to the brilliant NHS, perhaps the greatest socialist experiment in world history. It was administered by a very kind Italian gentleman who did the vaccination, was also supervising all the young volunteers at St Thomas's Hospital. There are very, very good reasons to get a vaccination, but I don't need to be compelled, and I don't need to be told that if I don't do it, there's going to be some kind of sanction, and there's going to, and effectively we need the 21st century version of the ID card to decide whether I can go to the pub or whether I can go to work or whether I can walk down the street. But that's where I disagree with Mr. Blair. I agree that vaccination is a really good thing, and the vaccination is the route not just to liberty but to personal and societal security. We need to vaccinate not just Britain but the world. We need to get Big Pharma to be a little bit less traditionally profit driven. We need to get governments to be a bit less nationalistic. We need to, I argue, suspend the patents so that we can mass produce these vaccines in the global south as well as in the global north, because the longer you have countries without the vaccine, the greater the room for variants to develop, which will then make us unsafe even if we've had this version of the vaccines. There's all sorts of things that have to be done from a human rights and a left perspective. But what I don't think is a good idea is for there to be a sort of vaccine internal passport or a vaccine compulsory ID card without which you can't live your life. And why do I think these passports are a bad idea? One, because they become a tool for discrimination and oppression on the street, at the door of the pub. This will not be policed by the police, but by the bouncer or the person who doesn't like you or the look of you on the door. I think it's very, very dangerous, and it's a two-tier system of living. Two queues at the football stadium, two queues at the pub, and we'll never go back from that. Secondly, I don't think it will work. We're already hearing from scientists and from small businesses about how hard it would be to administer this, and there'll be altercations, and publicans and restaurateurs and shop owners don't want to be getting into rows with people. And frankly, what is this certificate going to say? You know, it might say you've been vaccinated, but being vaccinated doesn't necessarily mean that you can't transmit the virus. We don't know yet. We know that my vaccination that I had the other week makes me less likely to get sick or die, less likely at the moment, but it doesn't mean that I can't still get the virus, not be symptomatic and transmit it. So we need to care about other people and not just ourselves. That's the thing about this virus. And finally, it's all very well for people that are lobbying for businesses who want to, the tech companies who want to design this electronic vaccine passport, and it's very good for the Tories, because what might happen in the future is that when the Tories are having their rows about whether it is safe to open up the economy or whether we need another lockdown because there's a variant or it's winter or whatever, what you don't want is a Tory government to say, we're off the hook now. We don't have to take measures to support people who need to self-isolate. We don't need to take measures to make sure that unscrupulous employers aren't forcing people to work in unsafe circumstances. We're leaving it all to the private sector, to businesses and individuals. You can get your passports or not, you can sort it out yourselves, and we're off the hook. And that is clearly what they want. And I don't think it's for Labour people to be encouraging them to do something so dangerous and something that gets them off the hook.
Can I ask you one more thing? How close is it, do you think, to us having this brought in as legislation, and how do you think they would bring it in as an act of Parliament?
Here's the thing, they could bring in legislation, or they might just say we're leaving it up to the private sector and to people to just sort it out themselves. You know, that's one option that's been mooted. So we're waiting to hear from the Prime Minister. Some people say that he might make an announcement even within days. And we know that private companies have already had grant money from government to develop these schemes, and they're getting paid by the government to develop what this kind of COVID passport might look like. It might be about vaccination, it might be about immunity, it might be about whether you've had it, it might be about testing, but whatever it is, some people will make a lot of money and other people will get oppressed and be discriminated against, and the Tories will get off the hook. So I'm not interested in any argument from anybody who is lobbying on behalf of business around it, or big business, or a particular sector of business, or whatever. We all just need to be completely transparent about our interests around this issue, and we need to have the debate. But as I say, where I agree with Tony Blair is that people must get vaccinated. We need to resist the anti-vax conspiracy theories. And by the way, one of my concerns about this is that when you force people to vaccinate, they're more like, a lot of people get very irritated. There was a brief period of compulsory vaccination in the Victorian era, and it actually led to a rise in the anti-vax movement. Anything medical, if you're told that you've got to do it, you're being forced to do it, that really rankles with people. It rankles with me. That's not what medicine is about. And so one of the many dangers with this kind of politics and this kind of policy is if people feel compelled and forced, the conspiracy theories will grow. And what we need is public education. What we need is to take the vaccination to the community, to have role models, whether it's Lenny Henry or anybody else, and make it a public health issue, not a security issue, not a policing issue, not a discriminatory issue.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on. It's a great introduction to the whole idea, the whole thing. And I really appreciate you coming. Thank you, Shami. And we're now going to speak to people on both sides of this argument, whether we should have vaccine certificates or not. And I'm going to start with people who we're going to mix them up. I'm going to have two people in favour of vaccine passports first. Bob Hughes, are you there?
I'm here, yeah.
Could you, what did you think about what Shami said? And do you have, has it changed your opinion on it, or are you still in favour of?
Still in favour. Three things have come up so far which I'd like to argue against, and then I've got 3 points in favour. The first one is the suggestion that discrimination and oppression are inevitable by having vaccine passports. It's not discrimination and oppression. You've either got one or you haven't. It doesn't matter what colour or gender or age you are. It's not going to be discrimination and oppression in that sense. It's just about have you got one or not. The second point that's been made is about the private sector profiting from this. What Labour should be arguing is this should be a public sector thing, that the National Health Service should do it, so that private organisations don't profit from it and we all benefit from it. The third point I saw in the chat there was somebody saying we have the right to freely participate under the Human Rights Act. Well, I'm afraid that, forgive the cliche, that's the same as the right to shout fire in a crowded theatre is one that you've got under the right of free speech. That's just not true universally. So I don't agree with those arguments that have come up so far, but let me tell you the points as to why I think the vaccine is important. I do a fair amount of traveling in my life. I've done a lot of work for humanitarian organizations in the global south, and I have my yellow fever vaccination card. It's entirely normal. I wouldn't be let into those countries if I didn't have it, and it would be wrong of me to even think of trying to get into those countries if I didn't have my yellow fever vaccination. So it's about respect for other people in that sense. It shows you care. If I try to wheedle my way into a country in Africa and said, "Oh, don't worry, you know, my freedoms say that I don't have to have a yellow fever vaccination," what do you think the response is going to be from those people who have suffered and died as a result of yellow fever? So I don't think that having, you know, there's any argument against having one. My mother-in-law lives in a care home. If one of the employees chooses not to have a vaccine and chooses not to prove it with a vaccine passport, I wouldn't want that person anywhere near my mother-in-law. It's about the health and safety of everybody. The second thing is it shows solidarity. It shows that you care for people. It shows that you're interested in the general well-being, which is something as socialists we should all be. And then the final point I want to make is it's about this nudge theory. Of course, if people want to go to football matches, they want to go to the pub, to the restaurants, and they need one, then they will be encouraged to get one. It's fine for all of us on this call. We're mainly, you know, intelligent, sensible, rational people who will go and get ourselves vaccinated. But there's a lot of people who aren't in that position, who haven't yet been persuaded. And this is one more tool in the armory of getting everybody vaccinated. Because if we don't do it in the UK, and if we don't encourage it around the world, this thing will just change society forever.
Oh, thank you, Bob. I'm going to move on to Mukesh Malhotra. Are you there, Mukesh?
Yeah, I'm here, Crispin. I'm actually very supportive of what Bob has said, because for 33 and a half years of my life, I worked for an international airline. And like him, he had to carry a yellow book, but my yellow book had everything from Hep A, Hep B, smallpox, polio, because I worked in some of the most challenging parts of the world. But the important thing was, it was as important to me to carry that as my passport, mainly because, well, like he said, the moment you arrive in another country, you needed to demonstrate that you had had the vaccination. It didn't mean that you weren't going to give it to anybody, because you can't really tell, but you at least protected yourself from that. And I think carrying the yellow passport, as I used to call it, became part of a norm for me. And the same with the kids. We went on a holiday to South America, or we went to Africa, or anywhere. It was important. But I think in this country, it's very difficult for people who don't travel. And it's the same with the Americans. Most Americans have never traveled other than within their own state, let alone their own village. You know, you call it the picket fence mentality. But we in Britain tends to travel a bit more. And I think it is important that what would happen is that when you had your Hep A, Hep B, well, smallpox no longer exists, but you would carry all those things with you. And the doctor would stamp it and sign it. And the document was an international document, which effectively had been signed off by the UN. So it wasn't some sort of conspiracy theory. It was more of a case of standardizing a document which you took with you. The French have already got a credit card sized document which can contain your entire e-record of your health stuff. I'm not advocating that, but I think if Shami was still on board, she would probably advocate something about liberty and everything else. But it is important because the work I do and as Bob said, he's worked for an NGO. I work for an NGO as well through Rotary, and I've been actively supporting the End Polio Now campaign since 1985. And we still have 2 countries in the world with polio. And if any of you watched the BBC News the other night, in Liberia, they are actually saying it's not COVID-19 we're worried about, it's not Ebola we're worried about, it's actually polio, because there are 2,000 people could be infected by one individual. And Africa has been polio-free for the past 2 years. And all of a sudden, Liberia is no longer polio-free. And it could mean that the rest of the world, and if many of you can remember back to calipers and meeting friends who had polio, it's not a pleasant experience. So it is important that all of these things, we need to have some sort of protection. We are fortunate in the NHS. Many NHS trusts are using very similar IT system. They use System 1 or they use something else. It can be extracted at the time of travel. It doesn't mean you have to carry it with you all the time. But I think if you're going away on holiday, it's important that you took some sort of document, because the other country may not let you in.
I mean, I just think I'm just the way we move on.
I've given you some thoughts, but my work on polio has helped me to understand issues around Ebola and the need for vaccination and to carry a document. I'm sorry, Crispin, I'm actually very much want to protect my fellow man, and I've had my first, and I'm worried about I might not get my second because I had a Pfizer one. And the government keeps saying you'll have your second, but I'm hearing from people who are in the 11th week and they haven't had a call to have their second jab. So that's a real serious concern, which no one wants to challenge. So thanks anyway, Crispin.
Thank you, Mukesh. Thank you. Now I'm going to move on to Rick, who's also in favour of vaccine certificates. Rick, are you there? Rick?
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean, I'm fully in support of a system that isolates those people that have been vaccinated. I don't see a need for massive government spending. It should be run by the NHS, and a card or something like the blue card in a smaller version, you know, would suffice. There is no need to spend millions and billions of pounds on this. Once you've had your second jab, NHS issue a pass, and you know it's there. The whole idea of it being discriminatory, everyone has a chance to have this. You know, it's everyone's choice. They can either have it or not. But the vast majority of people will be having this. And the vast majority of people do have a right to protect themselves. It's a majority thing. You know, I personally have been isolating since March last year because I've got COPD and a few other kind of breathing difficulties. The ability for me to be able to get out and about and to know that I'm safe is very, very important to me. And I'm sure that others in the same position as me feel the same. You know, we need to know that when we go out, we are safe. Okay, yes, they say there's no guarantee with the vaccine, but there's less of a risk. But people that refuse to have the vaccine, okay, you know, that's their choice, but I don't want them breathing down my neck when I'm having a pint. Can you understand what I'm saying?
Okay, look, I mean, I'm just aware of the time. I might move on a bit now, Rick. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you for coming on. I'm going to speak now to someone who's got a slightly different position from others. Is that Christina? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Hi. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Now, you're allergic to one of the chemicals in all of the vaccines, so you can't actually take them. Is that correct?
Well, it's got to be confirmed, but
what it is like when the gentleman before said that everybody has a choice. I don't agree that everybody does have a choice to take the vaccine or not to take the vaccine, because for a percentage of the population, you know, it can be actually life-threatening to take the vaccine. So, you know, and if you look at the information for all of the vaccines, there is an ingredient in all of them. So in 2 of them, there is polyethylene glycol, better known as PEG, and you know, a lot of people are allergic to that, and it can be life-threatening. And also in the when they say, well, you're okay to take the AstraZeneca one, but that has got a derivative of polyethylene glycol called polysorbate 80. So, you know, it can be very dangerous to take the vaccine. So there's a lot of people like myself who have severe allergies because these ingredients are in a lot of medications, some food products, etc., etc. And before you can actually have the vaccine, you do need to be seen by an allergy specialist to make sure that you haven't got anti-PEG antibodies before you have the vaccine. And you're advised, if you go through the small print, you are advised not to have the vaccine if you have an allergy to one of the ingredients. And these are the main ingredient in all 3 vaccines that you can have a severe allergy to.
So I've just about time. So how would you feel if they introduced this thing and you couldn't take the vaccine? I mean, would you feel like you were kind of like, I mean, every time you go in a pub, you'd have to probably explain
you know, it's
yourself
difficult because obviously you want to stay safe yourself. So I wouldn't want to go anywhere where I could obviously, you know, contract COVID-19 myself. Obviously, so you've got to be safe. You've got to be extra safe if if you can't have the vaccine. That's how I feel. But, you know, it's a tricky one because there's people like myself that may not be able to have any of the vaccines because there is an ingredient in all of them that you can be allergic to, and may have to wait for either, you know, for a nasal spray to be developed or a tablet that doesn't contain PEG. So, you know, to say you have that choice, you know, a percentage of the population do not have that choice.
All right. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to bring in Julie Batterson. Are you there, Julie?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're against the vaccine certificates as well, aren't you?
Oh, definitely. I just think it's, well, for a start, I've heard tonight about Tony Blair, and anything that Tony Blair agrees with, I'm automatically against. But I think I work with people with dementia. I go all over. I think it's up to us whether we have the vaccine. I've chosen to have it. I understand people don't. That's their choice. We're not asked to produce certificates in this country, for example, if we have the MMR vaccine, etc. Why should it be different for this one? I think it's a way into our health records that we don't have already. And I just don't trust this government with making certificates. I just don't trust them.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for coming on. And I'm going to introduce Matthew Galtress or Galtress. Are you there, Matthew?
Crispin, good evening. I'll just say before I get going, I'll try and obviously try to be brief. But if you think I'm running short time, just prompt me. Just prompt me orally.
I will. Yeah, okay. I will. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Crispin. Yes, I do oppose vaccine passports. Not because I'm an anti-vaxxer. I've got every intention of taking my vaccine. I'd encourage others to do so. But I think Baroness Chakrabarti, when she spoke, made some very important and powerful points. First thing to say is that, as Baroness Chakrabarti said, I think the science concerning to what extent it actually stops you from transmitting is uncertain at this point. I think the data seems encouraging, but it's still uncertain. Secondly, previous speakers have said have denied the idea that these are discriminatory. I don't think discrimination is too strong a word in this case, and I also don't think it's correct to say that people have choice. Now, the reason why I think that is because, for justifiable reasons, the government have prioritised who should get it based on clinical risk. But that means that somebody like me, I mean, I'm 28, and somebody like me will not get the vaccine until the back end of the process. I think my first one would probably be due towards the end of July if everything goes to plan. Now, what that means is that we know today that the Maltese government have said that from the 1st of June, people coming into Malta from the UK will require 2 vaccines. And P&O Cruises have said that people coming onto their ships from May will require 2 vaccines. That, frankly, actively excludes anybody under the age of about 70, frankly, because because a lot of people under 70 will not have had their second dose. Many may not have had their first. So I don't think it's too strong a word to say it's discrimination. And even once, I mean, the Prime Minister talks about people, this not being able to be introduced till everyone's been offered it. Even once we get to the 31st of July and everybody's been offered a vaccine, we don't know when or if children will be offered it, for instance, because that's still being researched. And as a previous speaker, Christina, I think it was, said, there are certain people who can't have it at all, potentially, like if they've got allergies, like if they're pregnant. I don't think pregnant women are advised to have it at the minute. And so I believe it is discriminatory and could potentially, I'm no solicitor, I'm just a layman, but could potentially fall foul of the 2010 Equality Act on those grounds, I think. So and even once we've got everybody vaccinated, there's still going to be the risk of new variants because the virus is still going to be here. It is still going to mutate and people's vaccines are going to need to be updated. So we're going to have to presumably update, as it were, vaccine passports as we go down this road, if we go down this road. So I believe this is a big mistake. It is discriminatory. It raises all sorts of ethical issues, like Lady Chakrabarti has just mentioned, around privacy and medical ethics and access to data and what have you, for very, in my opinion, questionable benefits. So for those reasons, this needs to be ruled out, and Labour's front bench need to rule this out forthwith without further delay.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to bring in Brian Precious. Brian, are you there?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Crispin. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, good stuff.
Are you're against vaccine certificates as well?
Yes, I'm against. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the excellent contribution from Shami Chakrabarti from the speaker we've just had. It was very good. I'm against the vaccine passports. I mean, first of all, I think that the most basic point, which I don't think has been raised and made so far, is that if you have vaccine passports, and certainly as we've just heard, some companies and maybe some countries are going to be making things dependent upon vaccine, but effectively they're going to make vaccine passports compulsory for some things. I think if that carries on across the board, then the actual uptake of vaccine passports is actually going to be less. That's going to alienate more and more people who are going to try to dodge vaccine passports, given that, as we've heard, if you make them compulsory, the discrimination that could be practiced on that basis will be greater. So I think if you make them compulsory, that could be indeed a counterproductive move. I mean, the point that I wanted to make, another point I wanted to make, is that I think 100 years ago, or just over 100 years ago, there weren't any passports as such, certainly compulsory passports. People could travel between countries a lot more freely than they can do since the First World War. with almost like let or hindrance. The introduction of passports themselves was something that came from the First World War and which, as it were, has never been repealed. So I think the passports of any kind are relatively recent. If you introduce passports, the actual uptake of them will actually be less if you make them compulsory for things, and that would include also the possibility of having vaccine certificates on the blockchain that is used for digital currencies. Yeah, you can have your vaccine passport on the blockchain, but because of how the blockchain operates, because it was started for digital currencies, you can have your passport on the, you can't take it off again. If you want to change it or want to renew it or want to delete it, you can't do. So having vaccine passports on the blockchain, which was founded for digital currencies, is also a bad idea. And lastly, but firstly, I said, it will actually probably alienate, because you'll probably get less people vaccinated in the first place, and of course, that is the main reason why that hasn't been stressed enough. That if you have the vaccine passports, the uptake of them will probably be less, and so you can't have the thing with the blockchain, because that is also discriminatory as well, because that discriminates against people who don't have the resources, they can't access the blockchain either. Thanks a lot, Crispin.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Right, I'm going to move on to Fran, who is in favour of vaccine certificates. Are you there, Fran?
I am indeed, Crispin. Thank you very much. Hang on, let me just take a drink.
All right.
Thank you. I do believe that having certification to show that you've had a coronavirus jab is really, really important. I'm a nurse. I've actually been qualified nurse for almost 45 years. But I'm also extremely clinically vulnerable. I have a rare lung condition and I've only got 40% lung function. So should I get COVID, I'm in serious trouble. And I've already had one of my COVID jabs. I have my little card to prove it. And that card on its own is what everybody's saying would be a vaccine passport. All provided for us by the NHS, free at the point of use. And I think that's where this is so important. For me, although technically shielding is over tomorrow, I'm going to remain shielded because I will not have had my second jab, and I certainly don't feel safe going out and about. And I believe it's incumbent on us as nurses, and indeed those who work in care homes, to have the injection to show, as Bob Hughes was saying, that we actually care about people, because this is about not only protecting ourselves but about protecting other people, and being able to show that we have done that will reduce very greatly the risk that we might put other people under. So that's my 2 pence.
Thank you. Right, we're going to bring in Bob Roberts, and then we're bringing in Susan Michie. Bob, are you there?
Hi, Crispin. Yes, I am. Like Fran and a couple of others before, I am in some form of proof that you have been vaccinated. I've got my card, and as of last Thursday, I had my second jab, because I'm also clinically extremely vulnerable. And I'm not really, it takes a while for you to build up antibodies once you've had your second jab booster anyway. So I won't be rushing out tomorrow either. But some of the points that I want to make have been covered by others. That visiting other countries, you have to get vaccinated. It's not just to stop you catching, say, yellow fever once you're out there. It's to stop you bringing it back. I mean, we've all heard from history about Typhoid Mary, and there was no dodgy track and trace then, private or otherwise. I think it's we have a duty to society to help protect society, to help protect the vulnerable. So I do feel some form of proof. Okay, if you don't want to take the vaccine, fine. But for those that don't want to take the vaccine or who have allergies to the vaccine, we must invest in a proper rapid, what's it called, a rapid flow testing for those that want to go somewhere, but as Christina is allergic to the ingredients in the vaccine. So there must also be a way to rapid test people who, for other medical reasons, can't be vaccinated. And again, you know, that way we are protecting the most vulnerable in society. And the most vulnerable tend to live in the most built up areas in the country, in our big towns and cities, not in some posh enclave in the country. And, or, you know, we've got people in care homes, relatives, oh, you can go and visit your relative now. But what if you haven't had a rapid test and you haven't been vaccinated? So it's all about protecting people for the future. And we are going to need booster because these viruses do mutate. But getting people vaccinated is a start, and getting rapid tests for those who can't get vaccinated.
All right. Thank you, Bob. So my time's going a bit now. Susan Michie, sorry, I mispronounced your name earlier. Susan?
Good evening.
Thank you for being so patient. Now, you've heard lots of people's opinions on this, and some of them have repeated themselves and other people as well. But why are you not in favour of the passports or the certificates?
First of all, can I introduce myself? I'm Professor of Health Psychology at University College London, and I'm on the behavioural science part of the UK's SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies. And I'm also on independent SAGE, but I'm speaking here in my personal capacity. I'm neither for nor against Crispin.
Oh.
It depends what you're going to use these for. And I think it's been a very good debate. I think a lot of good points have been made on both sides, and it's complex. The first question is, what are we going to use these certificates or passports for? There are three main areas. One is for travel, international travel. One is for jobs, where people might be vulnerable. And one is for entrance to pubs, restaurants, venues of different kinds. And I think the way one should think about it is potentially different in these three cases. And I think that reflects your discussion. Foreign travel, international travel, for most people is a choice. And as has been said, there are many parts of the world where it's compulsory to have a vaccination certificate. For my job, I've been to Africa. I had to get lots of different vaccinations and different certificates to go there. As has been said, it's about being internationally responsible. Other countries don't want us bringing our lurgies in, nor does this country want us bringing diseases from abroad back. For the sake of the whole world, we want to try and contain disease. So that seems fair enough, so long as obviously it's at minimal price. The second, and actually the majority of the public supports some kind of certification. I think certification is a better word than passport. Passport suggests there's lots of other information going into this. This is just certification about vaccination. Jobs is a more tricky one. If it's brought in there, it needs to be for very, very small number of occupations. But already you can't train to be a doctor without having a vaccination certificate for certain diseases. So that's already in place. So I would like to put those two on one side. I think the debate here is about vaccination certificates for the general things we do in our lives, going out for a meal or a drink, going to a music venue, going to a sports venue. these are the things where it's, I think, deeply problematic. And if I can just really summarize some of the key things that others have said, one of the real problems is it's discriminatory. Whether it's direct or indirect is a moot point. Somebody mentioned everybody's got a choice, but we know that vaccination uptake is really different amongst different groups, with the lowest rate being amongst Black Africans and the highest rate being amongst white communities. Why is that? Because there's been a history of racism, structural institutional racism, where various Black communities have been experimented on. So there's a question of trust here. It's not a choice. These are really deep-seated beliefs. I hope that with engagement and with listening and discussion, that a lot of beliefs will be changed. But the fact of the matter is, these are historical embedded beliefs. And so therefore, there are some groups in society who are already being discriminated against, have maybe had a rough experience in our own health service, distrust the government for very valid reasons, who are then being doubly discriminated against, because not only are they not having the vaccination, but they're now not allowed to be part of civil society. So that's a really huge issue. There's also an issue about, is this going to be the thin end of the wedge? There's questions of privacy. Again, one of your, or several of your speakers have talked about trust. Everything's done within a context. We're in a particular political context where there's a very low trust of this government in terms of handling the pandemic. And I think there's a concern amongst many people that, okay, it might start with just the vaccination certificates, but then would other things be put on top of that? Is this the thin end of the wedge down into an identity card? There's also the issue that people have said about pragmatics. Who's going to police this? Who's going to see whether this is done or not? This is a very socially divisive issue. Not only will it kind of be apartheid in terms of who's allowed in and who's not allowed into certain venues, but it's going to be setting some people against others in terms of policing it. And as ever with the handling this pandemic, the resources aren't put into this. You know, where are the resources into shops for ensuring that people wear masks, or on transport? People have already got busy jobs, driving buses and, you know, selling things, etc. The resources aren't put into any of this. I think one really important thing is actually it can be counterproductive. It will be seen by many people as yet another sign of social control. So those people who are not being vaccinated because they feel it's to do with social control, when this comes in, and there's evidence about this, that it can actually be counterproductive and people be less likely to vaccinate. So in my view, in terms of, I'm not talking about a very small number of jobs, I'm not talking about international travel, I'm talking about introducing it in this country. In my view, the emphasis should be on making places COVID safe, because that's the problem. This is putting it yet again onto individuals and away from the spaces. You know, we've already got a situation where the government hasn't made workplaces safe, hasn't made schools safe, and instead, you know, putting it onto individuals. And we've got the same problem. Let's make all public places COVID safe with good ventilation. You know, where is the ventilation anywhere? In New York City, there's a website where you can actually go onto it and find out the ventilation status of every classroom of every school in New York City. Do we know the ventilation status of any shops, any schools, any workplaces in this country? You know, this is taking the whole emphasis away from making places safe to saying you people need to be in a situation where our unsafe places won't make you ill. So I think there's also a problem there. So I won't take up more time because I think a lot of you have got a lot of very important and useful things to say, but just to congratulate you on having this meeting. I think it's a really important point. And I think if we had longer, I think we could probably all end up agreeing on things. But I do think it's complex. But I would just leave with a thing. Think about certification for what? And I would say for certification to entrance to everyday things that we want to do as a society, it will be very divisive. It will be impossible to institute and monitor, and it could be counterproductive. So for that, I would say no. For the others, I would say international travel, yes. And I would say for jobs, if it's kept incredibly narrow, it is warranted.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. And sorry for not introducing you properly.
That's fine. I'm happy to introduce myself.
Thank you. And now we are running out of time because of my ambition to get the whole country to speak, which doesn't often work. But I am a Democrat and I want as many people as I can to speak. So I'm going to bring in Felicity, who is, there you go. Felicity, you are against certificates for COVID. Are you there? For vaccine, sorry. Felicity, are you there? Hello, Felicity?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you on two. You've got two on, I think.
Yeah, I've had to turn one off because my laptop, the sound isn't very good. So
okay. Well, I like your picture. It's a good little picture of some. Do you want to tell us why you're against?
Yes. Yeah, sure. As people mentioned, initially I thought, oh well, you know, it's just it's a yellow travel document. But really, vaccine passports are a can of worms. They're divisive, as has been said. They're discriminatory, and they're wrong. They shouldn't be used in individual countries or as a tool to unlock international travel. This pandemic, once thought a great equaliser, soon was anything but. There are profound, as people have said, civil liberty, rights and equality concerns. And as they've said, the vaccine is not 100% effective in 100% of people. It's also a binary indicator of risk. You're safe if you've had it and you're unsafe if you're not. There's evidence that it prevents, there's very little evidence, as has been said, that it prevents people from transmitting the disease. And also, it can give a false sense, in that case, of security that could actually spread the disease. It could also, as has been said, unjustly discriminate in hiring or access to places or services. It could also be used for unintended purposes. It's open to fraud and misbehaviour, and it creates a tiered society. Digital vaccination passports pose essential questions for the protection of data privacy and human rights. They can be used to determine the degree of freedom to access public and private spheres where some people could move more freely whilst others can't. And what are those people, as have already been said, who cannot be vaccinated? Pregnant women, for example, or lactating of their breastfeeding, they can't. So what's going to happen is you've got a threat that decades of progress on women's rights could be reversed. And then those has also been said of religion and belief. Young people, they're at the end of the queue for receiving the vaccine. Disabled people due to medical conditions who cannot have the vaccine. So it will worsen existing and health inequalities. Research shows that people from ethnic minorities, lower levels of education and lower incomes are most hesitant or unlikely to receive COVID vaccines. This was a 2020 piece of research. And also, due to the hostile environment policies, many undocumented migrants are fearful of accessing health services. So if vaccination rates are lower in disadvantaged communities, then further limiting access to society would only deepen discrimination and alienate people even more. It will lead to greater polarisation and create deeper social divisions. It would also be disastrous for trust in public health authorities when trust has never been needed more. Health passports are the wrong focus, as they stress, and individuals' rights. And also, if the aim is herd immunity, then once enough of the population is vaccinated, it will be useless to force everyone to carry proof. So it would actually become obsolete and a waste of resources. It would distract attention from other ways of addressing the pandemic and its effects. Now, rich countries have ordered almost all the current available vaccines. This means that the average citizen in a high-income country is much more likely to receive a vaccine than a health worker or high-risk citizen in lower-income countries. Billions of citizens will not have access to vaccines for several years. We should not impede the rights and freedoms of individuals from lower-income countries. Finally, the UK is not a paper-carrying country. A pass, and it's very scary that I think this can lead to an identity pass. And it impacts our democratic traditions, risks of privacy, and also the most disadvantaged, marginalised people. It would be the biggest expansion of surveillance ever seen in the UK. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to bring in Julie Redmond, who's on Keith's iPad. You've got to keep up with this stuff. You there, Julie?
I am. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah.
Oh, good. Go on then. Will I speak?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I am very much against the idea of the vaccine passports. As the previous speaker said, I think it's a move towards ID cards and more of a police state. I'm also concerned about the vaccines and how they're being produced for use in this country. I can't really find out about the Pfizer vaccine as to whether it contains a genetically modified organism, but the AstraZeneca one does. And I keep thinking, I've had my first vaccine with AstraZeneca. I keep thinking 20 years ago, I was stood in a field nearby where we live, protesting against the growing of GM crops. And we were told then it was good science and was nothing to be worried about. But basically, it's a kind of worms, and it's unknown in terms of the long-term consequences. So, I've now been vaccinated with a genetically modified organism. I would feel a lot happier if I was in Cuba, which has a health service second to none, and where vaccines are being produced using a technology that they've been using for the last 30 years, and they're going to be vaccinating all of their population. And the big difference there is that the people who produce the vaccines work in collaboration with the health service and the scientists. So, private profit is not the issue. The other thing about the AstraZeneca vaccine is that, as I understand it, the EU waived some of their normal regulations in developing a new vaccine, and they said that they didn't have to do an environmental impact assessment. So basically, these vaccines are experimental, and in terms of the long-term effects on us, it's unknown, and that's my concern.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on, Julie. And I'm going to move on to Heiko, who was on our show, when was it, last week or the week before? I can't remember. But Heiko has been struggling to speak at Speaker's Corner because of the regulations there about speaking. Heiko, are you in favour of the vaccine certificates?
I'm totally opposed to the vaccine certificates. A number of reasons, obviously, bullet points I have to make because we don't have much time. Firstly, people who have already had coronavirus have the strongest antibody and T cell, which is the long-term immunity of human beings, to previous infections. And so you should have discriminated or distinguished between those who've had an infection and those who've not had an infection. Nobody who has had an infection with SARS-CoV-2 should have received the vaccine. And actually in Israel, they did do that, but for some reason, this has been totally bypassed in Britain. The problem with that is that it may increase your risk and dangers down the road when new variants and when coronavirus season reappears, which generally tends to be in the winter time in Britain and Europe. Secondly, the way you test if someone is immune, in other words, has an effective physical response by the body to an infection, is by testing for T cells. And instead of testing for T cells, they test for antibodies. And this, for some reason, has been totally ignored because primarily, I think Susan Michie could probably confirm, they didn't have any immunologists on stage. They didn't have anyone with qualification in immunology. And that probably is why they didn't tell people to take vitamin D. The trials, I mean, basically, I've got the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer trial reports here. They were tested on a very small number of people, 40,000 people for both trials, and 170 or 190 were the control group, with the final group, if you like. They're the people who got infected, of which 95% had not had the vaccine, and 5 or so percent had had the vaccine and they got infected. In other words, it's a tiny group of people on which to justify the vaccination of millions and millions of people around the world with totally unknown consequences. And these vaccines have only been tried for 1 year. They should have been tried for 7, 10, or 15 years. And so the idea of injecting young children is totally barbaric. And attempts to introduce vaccine passports, let's be clear about this. There are 230 vaccine candidates in the world, 230. Are you going to verify the efficacy of all of them? Give an example of how that comes into play. In China, you have to go to China now, you have to have the Chinese vaccine called by Sinopharm. It is, to be fair to it, it's actually an inactivated virus, unlike this mRNA coding implanted into the body to produce a spike protein. So in order to go to China, you would have to have a British vaccine of some sort and a Chinese vaccine. No one's tested the interaction between these two, and no one's tested the interaction between all the different vaccines. Plus the fact that the vaccines in Britain, for example, are being used off permission usage. For example, the idea of giving spread out more than 21 days is off usage. They weren't even given permission for that. And yet the government authorized that. So what we have is a total shambles. The reason they're advocating vaccine passports is to scare people into taking vaccines that they do not need to take, because only over 70-year-olds with comorbidities are at serious risk of death from these from coronavirus. And that's why they legitimately can take the vaccine if they fear that they might be in danger. But to impose something as a sort of, it is nothing less, in my opinion, than a human experiment.
Thank you, Heiko. I'm going to move on to. I have to move on. I'm afraid there's people here who are down to speak, and Jeremy Corbyn's just come in, and he hasn't got long, so I just wanted to bring in. Now, is she here? Can't see Silkie Carlo. I'm here. Oh, she's got UK. Sorry, I'm looking for S. Silkie Carlo from Big Brother Watch. Are you there?
I'm here. Good evening.
I just thought I'd bring you in before Jeremy comes on. So what have you heard from the people speaking on the show today? Do you think there were good reasons to have vaccine certificates or any kind of certificate? I mean, maybe as Susan was saying, there could be some kind of certificate for some professions, but not as a whole, as a kind of passport for getting by every day. What do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for organising this, and it's amazing to see. I mean, there must be 200 people here right now. It's fantastic that everyone's taking part in this and in the chat as well. And it's really, really, really timely debate, because as I understand, there could be an announcement on this within days. And frankly, we need to organise and we need to mobilise now, because we are on the precipice of one of the biggest civil liberties threats of modern times. I actually can't believe that we are debating a segregation policy, a policy that would seek to perpetuate segregation throughout the whole population in 2021. But that's where we are. And I think you would hope that at this point in time, we're a year into the pandemic, there's been great advancement with vaccinations and with treatments. You would be hoping that we were starting to think about how can we emerge with renewed hope and with renewed freedom and with real safety. But instead, this government wants us to emerge under the shadow of injustice and deeper division and darker discrimination in the most appalling way through COVID certification, which, and let's, you know, we all have, I think what I've heard through what everyone's saying this evening is that we all have a common goal. We all want to be healthy, we all want to be safe, we all want to be free. The question is, how do you get there? You don't get to that state of safety and freedom through punishment for non-compliance or through extending this kind of network of privatized citizen policing. That's not how it works, obviously. That should go without saying. What's proposed with coronavirus passports is different pieces of data that tell you about the risk that you're at as an individual. And this is one of the problems with this policy. It individualizes risk, and it allows big industries and companies and employers to evade their own sense of responsibility and liability. All the risk is pinned on the individual. You take the vaccination, or you swab yourself several times a week, or absurdly, the other thing that they're looking at is and I understand what Heiko is saying about natural immunity, but this is the third thing that they're looking at, is that natural immunity will be the third element of this. Now, that's very good for people that have that natural immunity, but the flip side is people who don't are being forged into some kind of subclass of citizenry and given a perverse incentive to go and get infected to develop that kind of immunity. That's absurd. We're going to see, so this is the thing, we're going to see, the whole point of the COVID status certificate is to create a two-tier society and to create a subclass of citizenry who are kept out of the rest of society, who are kept out of jobs. And in this group, we will see an overrepresentation of racialized groups, migrants, poorer people, people with lower education, because these are the groups in which we're seeing lower uptake of the vaccination. And it's also going to result in unlawful discrimination against people who can't take the vaccination for various reasons, which will be pregnant women, some people with health problems and disabilities, young people, and in fact, even potentially older people on a cycle. So already we've seen this week an announcement that over 70s are going to need to have booster vaccines in the summer. So your COVID pass is going to expire. And so we're going to see discrimination on a cycle. I cannot imagine in 2021 in Britain living in a world where we have 2 queues to go into an event, or where some of my colleagues are told they can't work, or where my neighbour has less freedoms than I do, on this kind of medical apartheid basis. We have to go through this together. This is a pass at the beginning, the seed of a digital ID that's going to punish the most marginalised in society and protect businesses, and it's going to make billions of pounds for some people as well. The idea that everyone in the world is going to have this digital ID. Here we go. Here comes a big digital infrastructure in which we see checkpoints everywhere. It's going to make no sense to have this in just some places. You know, if you have this to, let's say, so the first thing the first place they're going to trial this, I'm sure, is going to be a stadium event. It's going to be something like a football game. So it will start there, but soon people will realise it doesn't make sense to have the checks just at the stadium, because we all got on the train here, we all got on the bus here, we all got on the coach here, we're all going to the pub afterwards. My friend who couldn't come to the match, I'm standing next to him at work next week. You know, so there's going to be a logical breakdown, and you're going to see a push for these checkpoints everywhere. Who's going to be doing this checking? It's going to be managers, employers, security guards. Anyone dressed with authority is going to have the right to say to you, show me your papers, literally. And who's going to be asked the most? Probably not actually someone like me. It's probably going to be people in precarious employment, people with migrant status, people who are going to be targeted for other reasons. And look, I'm incredibly, I've actually never, a lot's happened this year, but I don't think I've ever been more nervous about a government policy than this one. It's actually psychopathic. Wow. And we need to mobilise. The Labour movement needs to mobilise. We cannot have the front bench. The front bench has turned a blind eye on a lot of things over the past year. It cannot turn a blind eye on this. We will never recover. If we create a two-tier society now, a checkpoint society, we will never come back from this.
Right. Well, thank you, Silkie, for coming on. I'm going to bring in Jeremy, and other people might speak later. Okay, so if you're down to speak or you've got your hand up, you'll be on later. So don't worry about that. Now, Jeremy, are you there?
I am indeed. How are you?
Yeah, we're good. We just had quite a busy show. There's people are for and against vaccine certificates, but we heard from Shami and we've just heard from Silkie there about the impact this might have on freedoms and how people could be discriminated against with these certificates. We haven't heard much from the Labour Party front bench or even backbenchers on this issue. What's your view on this?
Well, first of all, Crispin, thanks very much for inviting me on. It's been at short notice, and I can't stay long because I'm actually in the midst of another meeting at the moment. I've just dipped out of that to come into this one. But I wanted just to say a few words. I didn't hear Shami earlier, but I have obviously discussed the issues with her, and I'm aware of her views, and that was why I was very pleased to appoint her as Shadow Attorney General. Imagine a government with Shami as Attorney General standing up for peace, justice, progress and liberty. It would be a marvellous thing. A couple of points. First of all, I'm not a COVID skeptic. I believe COVID is real. I believe it exists. I believe it is dangerous, and we cannot close our eyes to it. And I did an event at Sadar on Sunday evening with Mike Rosen, who described what he had been through with the coma he was in and the way he was treated. So I think we've got to be real and realistic about it. And obviously you have to look after people, but you also have to recognise that COVID has had disproportionate effects on people and communities across the country. The health risk is greater amongst older people than younger people, that we know. The death rate is highest amongst the older, poorest people, highest amongst Black and minority ethnic people, and highest amongst Black and minority ethnic health workers, transport workers, and others. And so the response to COVID has been mixed in the sense that the government has thrown a great deal of money at private contractors, often extremely inefficiently, and on the basis of so little preparation, information or tendering that public inquiry needs to be held into every single one of those massive contracts that was handed out. And that I would absolutely support. I voted against the renewal of the corona restrictions in Parliament last week, and I voted against them because I believe they're too draconian, they're overreaching, and the very least should have been a removal of Schedule 21, which is the utterly excessive police powers. And we saw how ludicrous this was with the way in which the vigil for Sarah Everard was policed last week. And so therefore, I also voted against and will continue to vote and campaign against the police bill. And I'm very concerned about the generality of the direction we're going on civil liberties in this country. Now, I've been opposed to many draconian laws over the years, and I was thinking back to demonstrations in the 1980s against the criminalization of trespass, against the police bills and police restrictions of that time. And I've always been on the side of the right of free speech and the right of assembly. And when you're dealing with a major crisis, and corona is a crisis, you can deal with it two ways. You can say, as a government, we'll give ourselves all these powers through our parliamentary majority, and we will enforce a solution on this. They've given themselves enormous powers and they haven't achieved the solution they thought they were going to achieve. We've had a higher death rate than most other countries in Europe. You achieve far more by education, cooperation and participation. You achieve far more by convincing people than by threatening people. And therefore, I am very concerned about, as I've said, the police bill, but also the threat of the idea of a vaccine passport, the idea of restrictions on who can go where, if they've had the vaccination or not. I think the vaccination should be available for all people. They should be encouraged to think about it and take it up. But the idea that you make a vaccine compulsory is, I think, not a good idea. I think I'm right in saying there have never been compulsory vaccines in Britain. I think children should be vaccinated against MMR and so on, but making it compulsory doesn't actually achieve the what you want. What it does is actually marginalises a few people that have deep concerns about it. I think they should be discussed and talked to. But the dangers that we now have are a combination of these things. One is the police bill goes through, which restricts our right to speak, our right to protest, our right to shout or sing at protests outside Parliament or other places, restricts that right of assembly. If this was happening in many other countries around the world, the British government would protest about it. They would protest about it if it was happening in what they called an oppressive regime around the world. But because they're proposing to do it here, some or other it's different. Therefore, I'll continue my protest against the police bill. I don't know exactly what they're going to propose on the vaccine passports, but I'm quite concerned that they will introduce a vaccine passport, and that will then become, could be, an entry point to sporting events or whatever else. Well, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that is a fair or reasonable way of going on. And I think it's a fundamental attack on our liberties. And I think we have to be very vigilant about the rights that we have, not that we enjoy, the rights that we have won. Take the thing in its historical context. In the 16th, 17th, 18th century, there were a succession of more and more repressive measures as the Crown, as it then was, took upon itself powers to prevent printing, prevent speaking, prevent assembly, prevent religious freedom, and so many other things. The turning point came during the English Civil War, but there was then massive repressions after the English Civil War. And it wasn't until the late 18th century and the French and American revolutions and the growth of free thinking of Mary Wollstonecraft, of William Godwin, and so many others that you moved into a basically 19th century progress with great struggle on rights of religious freedom, with steps taken backwards during the Napoleonic Wars and immediately afterwards. But those rights of free speech, freedom, information, right to join a trade union and so on were all won during the 19th and 20th century. And what I see now is a combination of high-tech power and ability to silence people by restricting access to social media and so many other things as being quite a dangerous step. And so I hope we will do two things. One is defeat the police bill with all the intentions and horrors that are behind it. Secondly, defeat the idea of a COVID vaccination passport and move into a period where we're debating seriously a charter of rights, a charter of our civil liberties, which I think would be a much better way forward. I want to live in a society where people can speak out. I want to live in a society where you can express your religious beliefs in whatever they are. I want to live in a society free from racism and free from hate. But I don't think it's the job of the state to control what we say, do, or think, except to defeat racism and hate speech and violence that goes with it. So there's always a complex balancing act, and that is one that we have to take forward. And I think the fact that you've got a very large number of people on this call this evening having that discussion is something. So let's have that discussion, have that debate, but above all, no compulsion, no police bills, rights of assembly, free speech, and enjoyment of a free society. Because if you start bringing in whole piles of restrictions as are done, what happens? You get the events you had when poor Sarah Everard was murdered. You get the oppression that comes after that, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. And that is not a direction in which I want to go. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you for coming on, Jeremy, and thank you for standing up for that issue, because it scares me what might be happening to this country with all these police powers and ID cards and stuff like that. Thank you very much.
By the way, I did strongly oppose ID cards, and that was a time when Tony Blair, do you remember him, wanted to introduce ID cards, and a number of us on the Labour backbenches said there's no way we'd support it. And we joined up with any other MP we could find in any party to oppose it. And eventually we defeated the idea of ID cards because of everything else that went with them. So, you know, I mean, just occasionally you do win things on a negative prayer in Parliament, and we did. And
I'm now going to show the results of the survey that was taken by over 1,000 people, and this is it. Do you think vaccine certificates or passes should be introduced in this country? Yes, 42%. No, 46%. Other, there's always other, because people don't like to fit into a box. 12%.